right now, the political action group, formed out of the Obama campaign is trying to shame all the Republican science deniers in Congress. Personally, I don't believe that's going to be a very productive approach. What 350.org and others are trying to do is advocate for drawing a line in the sand, not saying it's the Keystone Pipeline and moving off of fossil fuels. So they're trying to create, out of the majority that believes that this is a real reality, they're trying to create a motivated majority, which is what you see as necessary for social change in other campaigns if you look at other issues in the past. So, like, as a reporter looking at this, I mean, there is a clear trend in recent years towards the majority of Americans really recognizing this issue. We tend not to indulge in the debate at Climate Central about whether it's man-made or not. We go much more into the weeds of what is known about a particular extreme event or what isn't.
Can I say something about sustainability to come back to that question? Sustainability has actually a very strong ethical, intergenerational justice component. Sustainability, one definition is that we shouldn't do anything in our generation that makes hard the life of future generations. So it's this intergenerational inequity or equity that we need to consider. And so, when we think about land use, then we moved a lot of our stuff in the past 100 years to the coasts, to the shoreline. It's not sustainable. Nor is it sustainable that all the developing countries will live to the standard that we had in a fossil fuel intensive past 50, 100 years, whatever, that they will come up to the same level. It's unsustainable, because if you do that, boy, then that coastal development on a global scale is really unsustainable. So it has a very global kind of meaning, and the question is, how do you bring this down to the local action? And that's why we need, what the city's doing, the SIR, that's what the Plan 2030 is doing, and other institutions are doing around the world, at least those that are on the cutting edge. But there's a very strong ethical issue, and that should not be forgotten.
Are there other questions for that? Yes.
I was interested in the comment about risk warning and vulnerable communities. I'd be interested in how the vulnerability is defined, knowing that people have different give different credence to the kinds of messages, and people have different options when risks are shared with them. It's not just the people who have a downstairs parking garage who are worried about vandalism. And so we saw quite a different response to the risk warnings based on people's socioeconomic status. So I'd be interested to hear your comments about that.
I think there's a lot of social science research that shows exactly that, which is that if you issue, for example, a hurricane warning or an evacuation order in a city 48 hours in advance of the storm, people are going to react differently in the same neighborhood. People are going to respond in certain ways based on what their neighbors are doing, based on family phone calls, based on how many officials knock on their door and yell at them, and explain the risks. A lot of people, there were some cases in Staten Island where people didn't leave because they rely on certain services for care, and they couldn't arrange that fast enough in order to leave. Some people had nowhere to go. They didn't, know about shelters or didn't want to go to a shelter. Some people had homes robbed when they left during Irene. So they said, no, I'm going to stay here and protect my home. I think the job of scientists is to make sure they get the forecasts and the estimates as close to the target as possible, and to communicate the risk accurately and in ways that are relevant for people down to the local level as much as they can, which Climate Central is trying to do over the long term for sea level rise and helping people to see what it might be and look like. With Sandy, there were no storm surge warnings or storm surge maps. I mean, there were multiple maps that you could find all over the place, but the National Hurricane Center or whoever responsible for it weren't issuing impact maps that people could look at and see, oh, my community is really totally in line for this. So that's more of a risk communication thing that the National Weather Service is quickly moving to fix in the wake of that storm. But maybe you have other comments from the city's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, we obviously saw during the storm, my job during the storm was actually coordinating generator delivery to most of the assisted living and the public housing facilities, and we saw a lot of those folks not, they were located highly concentrated in vulnerable areas. We've all heard the stories about how the housing authority didn't have the generator stock in place to make sure that power got back on. People were afraid to leave because they didn't want to lose their spot in public housing. So there were a lot of issues that certainly got covered during the storm, and that we started to sort through as a city. About a few weeks ago now, the mayor released his after action report, which has a lot of those systems that we're trying to put in place as a city, really start to look at some of the experience during the storm and figure out what is it that we need to do better the next time around. I mean,